Today, we will continue to study the Horus Heresy chronology and what happened after it. Last time we discovered the event that happened pre-Heresy and stopped at the point when sons of Horus and Death Guard legions, Horus invaded the Fortress World and Night World of Molech, Sangral Campaign and the Salvation Run. An Imperial Fist's assault force dispatched from Terra executed a daring raid to capture the antidote for a slow-acting Exterminatus-class viral weapon deployed against the Loyalist stronghold of Gramercy on the contested hive world of Hercalium. After securing the antidote from the Traitor Mechanicum biologist gene labs, the heavily outnumbered Imperial Fists fought their way through massed traitor forces, navigating a perilous gauntlet through the underhives of Hercalium to deliver the antidote to Loyalist Medicaid detachments, thereby saving the population of the Gramercy subhive. The viral overspill ravaged the traitor forces, leaving them unable to contain or cure the contagion within their own ranks. Within weeks, Hercalium was liberated by the Emperor's servants. The tale of the so-called Salvation Run emerged as a rallying cry for Loyalist support within the sector, turning the Sangral campaign in favor of the Loyalists and solidifying their grip on the loyalty of the Segmentum Solar. Establishment of the Imperium Secundus. With the Imperium fractured into two isolated halves due to the tumult of the Ruin Storm, the light of the Astronomicon had become imperceptible from Ultramar, and no word from the Emperor had reached the Imperium for several years. In response to this dire situation, Primarch Guilliman of the Ultramarines declared the formation of the Imperium Secundus, aiming to continue the struggle against the traitors and preserve the Emperor's legacy. Upon the arrival of the Blood Angels, who had escaped from the Cygnus cluster, Guilliman proclaimed his brother Sanguinius as the rightful heir to the Emperor, designating him as Regent or Imperator Regis of the Imperium Secundus. In hindsight, Guilliman would later confess that this decision was perhaps his gravest error, leading him to seek to obliterate all records of the Imperium Secundus's existence. Battle of Sothar. The distant world of Sothar, situated near the fringes of the galaxy, lay at the boundary of both the 500 worlds of Ultramar and the broader expanse of Imperial space. Beneath the towering Mount Pharos, the Ultramarines discovered a massive aperture constructed by an unknown Xenos species later identified as the Necrons. This device served as both a telepathic beacon and a route finder, enabling instantaneous communication across vast distances, even penetrating the chaotic turbulence of the Ruin Storm. Following their defeat at the hands of the Dark Angels at Sagwalsa, remnants of the Night Lord's Legion navigated this beacon through the warp, arriving at Sota. Over several months, the Night Lords secretly gathered intelligence on the Ultramarines' activities, soon uncovering the nature of the arcane device, also called the Pharaohs, on the restricted planet. The Night Lords launched a surprise assault on the lightly defended world, intent on seizing the Pharaohs to locate their flagship, the Nightfall, and to discover the whereabouts of their missing Primarch, Conrad Kurz. In the ensuing battle, Warsmith Barabbas Dantioch of the Loyalist Iron Warriors sacrificed himself by overloading the Pharaohs, rendering it inoperable and denying the Night Lords access to its formidable capabilities. The far-reaching consequences of this act would not be felt for another 10 millennia, as the massive final emission of psychic energy from the Pharaohs pierced the intergalactic void, serving as a beacon one last time for the Tyrannid Hive fleets. Vulcan lives. The charred remains of Primarch Vulcan were recovered by the Ultramarines from the surface of Makrag, where his body had fallen after burning up in the atmosphere following his descent from orbit. Initially, the Ultramarines mistook the colossal corpse for a grotesque statue. However, over the following days, Vulcan's body began to regenerate as his abilities as a perpetual came into effect, eventually restoring him to life. When he awakened, Vulcan was in a state of mental instability, often exhibiting violent and incoherent behavior. This was the result of the twisted bond forged with his disturbed brother, Conrad Kurz, during the torturous months Vulcan endured aboard the Night Lord's flagship, the Nightfall. Vulcan's senses heightened whenever Kurz was nearby, leading to violent outbursts. Unbeknownst to the Dark Angels, who had recently arrived on Macragge following the declaration of Imperium Secundus, Kurz had taken refuge within the bowels of their flagship after the Night Lord's defeat at Sagwalsa. As the Night Haunter unleashed chaos among the people of Macragge, Vulcan ultimately broke his bonds and began a relentless hunt for Kurz. Their battles ravaged the capital city until Vulcan's fellow perpetual, John Grammaticus, intervened, using the Fulgurite, a solidified fragment of the Emperor's psychic power, to stab Vulcan through the heart, seemingly killing him. This time, however, Vulcan did not revive. In the aftermath of the confrontation, Kurz escaped. Vulcan was placed into stasis within a sarcophagus handcrafted by Guilliman, who inscribed the words "Unbound Flame" on its side. Rebirth of Vulcan. After Vulcan's second death on Macragge, the surviving salamanders of the Shattered Legion from Istvan V were drawn to the Ultramarines' homeworld by the empathic beacon of the Pharaohs, where they were allowed to stand vigil over their Primarch's casket. First Captain Artellus Numion was convinced that Vulcan still lived, and eventually embarked on a difficult journey back to Nocturne with his Primarch's body. Numion believed that if Vulcan's body were immersed in the cleansing flames of the Unbound Flame on Mount Deathfire, he could be restored to life. As they travelled, the Salamanders faced pursuit from a large traitor fleet composed of elements from both the Death Guard and Word-Bearers, each commander driven by personal motivations to capture Vulcan's remains. Miraculously, the Salamanders navigated through the turbulent ruin storm and reached Nocturne, where they were greeted by Nomus Ritan, Lord Chaplain of the 18th Legion and Keeper of the Keys of Prometheus. A fierce battle ensued between the traitor and loyalist forces, culminating in a hard-fought victory for the Salamanders. Following this triumph, the Salamanders conducted Vulcan's burial rites, returning their Primarch's body to the fires of Mount Deathfire in the hope of his resurrection. After waiting for over a solar week, Numion's spirit began to wane with uncertainty. As the next time of trials on Nocturne approached, First Captain Numion renounced his rank and wandered into the burning ash wastes surrounding Mount Deathfire, offering himself as a final sacrifice to restore his Gene-Father and Primarch. Carnage of Moroks. In one of the largest confrontations between loyalist and traitor-aligned mortal auxilia and militia forces, over 3 billion battlefield fatalities were recorded as a result of the brutal war of attrition on the sector capital world of Moroks Excellus. The Morok Civil War unfolded in almost complete isolation from the rest of the galaxy, exacerbated by turbulent warp storm activity and the lack of strategic significance for either side. The conflict became notorious for its escalating levels of atrocity and the rapid technological regression of both factions. Scouring of Gildan's Star. Scattered remnants of the Blood Angels' Legion engaged in a lengthy and bloody campaign against Word-Bearers' forces near the galactic core, on the borders of the Imperium Secundus, culminating in the near-total destruction of both armies. Throughout the campaign, the Blood Angels showed no mercy in their purge of worlds that had embraced the demonic teachings of the Word-Bearers' Dark Apostles, executing all 7 colonized worlds of Gildan's Star in one particularly notable instance. Battle of Nicron. Under the command of Imperial Fists, Primarch Rogel Dawn, a loyalist battle group supported by elements of the Salamanders' Legion, 30 regiments of the Imperialis Auxilia, and a strike force of Legio Astorum Titans, engaged an Emperor's Children Millennial stationed to garrison the Beta Garmon system on the periphery of the Segmentum Solar. The Emperor's Children were caught off guard at Nicron City on Beta Garmon II, and after a fiercely contested battle, the combined Loyalist forces drove both them and their Legio Mortis allies from Beta Garmon III, thereby securing control of the system. This victory would soon trigger a series of escalating traitor counterattacks aimed at reclaiming Beta Garmon as a strategic point for an eventual assault on Terra, ultimately serving as a precursor to the much larger conflict known as the Battle of Beta Garmon. Grand Imperial Muster and the Battle of Beta Garmon. For reasons that would only become clear later in the war, the Ruin Storm, which had been conjured by the servants of Primarch Lorgar during the Battle of Calth, began to recede across vast expanses of the galaxy, re-establishing astropathic communications and transport routes to Terra. This reopening allowed Loyalist high commanders to utilize the powerful astropathic relay located in the Beta Garman system to contact and recall previously lost or stranded Imperial forces from the war-torn reaches of the Northern Imperium. The Imperial muster at Beta Garman quickly escalated into the largest assembly of Loyalist might since the early days of the Civil War. A concentration of power so formidable that it compelled the traitors to respond in kind. The ensuing conflict, known as the Battle of Beta Garman, or the Great Slaughter, became a theatre of war encompassing the Titan Death and the Sea of Fire campaigns, each significant battles in their own right. The clash resulted in billions of lives lost, thousands of starships destroyed, and nearly shattered the might of the Collegia Titanica. By the conclusion of this battle, both factions had suffered such extensive casualties that their only remaining recourse for ultimate victory was to force a decisive confrontation. As history records, that final confrontation would take place at Terra, but only after the heavy toll of the Great Slaughter had been fully exacted. Battle of Talon. Talon, an Imperial muster world of unparalleled significance, faced a direct assault from the Iron Warriors Legion, who emerged from the Eye of Terror under Perturabo's orders to retrieve a powerful Chaos artifact hidden beneath the planet's surface. Perturabo's legion was bolstered by numerous allied traitor Imperial army regiments, titans from the Legio Kritos, Godbreakers, and knights from House Caesarion. Both the Loyalist and traitor high commands were taken by surprise at Perturabo's actions, which quickly escalated when he ordered an exterminatus on the world. This action unleashed a voracious life-eater viral barrage that rendered the once thriving Talon into a poisoned wasteland, making the air unbreathable. While the population was nearly annihilated, many defenders survived within extensive subterranean shelters. The ensuing campaign pitted massive formations of Imperial Army and Solar Auxilia tanks, titans of the Legio Griffonicus, War Griffons, Knights of House Megron, and the armoured forces of the Iron Hands, Imperial Fists, White Scars, and Ultramarines against each other. With no infantry capable of surviving in the toxic wastes of Talon, most combat vehicles were environmentally sealed. As the conflict dragged on, it attracted Loyalist and traitor forces from hundreds of worlds across the Segmentum Tempestus, culminating in a cataclysmic conclusion that forced the traitor forces to retreat. The Battle of Talon is now regarded as the largest armoured engagement in humanity's recorded history, and although it was considered a victory for the Loyalists, millions of warriors and war machines from both sides lay strewn across the lifeless, toxic surface of the planet. Following the battle, Talon was reclassified as a desert world. Fate of the Sabalis Liberatus. The Sabalis Liberatus, a Raven Guard Legion battlecruiser lost in the warp after escaping the Void battle over Istvan V, finally emerged into real space near Galaspar on the fringes of the Veiled region. The survivors aboard, comprising a mix of Astartes from various Loyalist legions, had spent the interim in self-imposed, suspended animation, and awoke to find themselves completely cut off from information and support. They came under fire from Imperial patrol vessels, whose captains had sided with the traitors. This shattered Legion force seized the patrol ships, conquering their attackers. After conducting repairs on the captured vessels, they embarked on a 2-standard-year odyssey of combat to return to the Segmentum Solar and ultimately to Terra, where they would engage in the final Void battles against the traitor onslaught in the closing days of the Great Civil War. Cataclysm of Iron begins. In the sectors of the Segmentum Tempestus and Segmentum Pacificus lies a network of forged worlds collectively referred to as the Belt of Iron. Since the sundering of the Imperium, many of these worlds declared allegiance to traitor and dark mechanicum causes, orchestrated by Fabricator General Kelbahal of Mars, while others remained loyal to Terra or sought to remain aloof from the conflict. Tensions erupted into full-scale war in the 10th year of the 31st millennium over the question of the Emperor's legitimacy as their omnissiah. This conflict pitted the dark Mechanicum-aligned Forge worlds of Incunabula, Urdesh, Valia Maximal, and Calibrax against the forces of the loyalist Forge worlds, Graia, Alyeth, and Atar Median, while Arachnis and Gerulus Station fell into the chaos of civil war. The resulting conflict, later dubbed the Cataclysm of Iron, saw the Forge Lords, their armies and allied Titan legions and knight households turn against one another in protracted warfare. Numerous human-inhabited worlds in the region suffered greatly, becoming the battlegrounds for the Forge Lords in fighting. Even the apocalyptic intervention of the Dark Angels proved insufficient to end the spiraling disaster, and battles between dozens of Forge worlds continued long after the Horus Heresy had concluded. Battle of Pluto. As part of the ongoing solar war, the Alpha Legion executed multiple diversionary attacks involving sabotage and preparation, plunging the Sol system into chaos. Their primary target was the fortress moon of Hydra, which orbits Pluto. First Captain Sigismund and a small fleet of Imperial Fists valiantly defended Pluto against the larger Alpha Legion fleet until reinforcements arrived in the form of the formidable mobile star Fort Phalanx and a substantial fleet of Imperial Fists and Armada Imperialis warships. During the height of the battle, Primarch Dawn, the Praetorian of Terra, led an assault on the fortress moon, confronting his brother, Primarch Alpharius, in melee combat. Dawn ultimately slew Alpharius, forcing the Alpha Legion forces to withdraw. Malagant conflict. While the remaining loyalist enclaves appeared crippled by Warmaster Horus's relentless onslaught, elements of the Death Guard stationed on their Legion homeworld of Barbarus spearheaded an offensive into the southern reaches of the Imperium. Their prime target was the vast industrial hives of Malagant, a world of great strategic importance due to its manufactoria. The Death Guard aimed to crush the defiance of the surrounding sectors, many of which looked to the resolute loyalist leaders of Malagant for guidance. However, the Death Guard encountered fierce resistance from the Malagantine Auxilia, who employed cunning ambushes and aggressive counterattacks, led by Astartes bearing the sable mark of the Raven Guard. Lacking the numbers to confront the traitors head-on, the Sons of Corvus utilized their skills as skirmishers and assassins against their former brothers, ensnaring them on a world they could not abandon while battling an enemy they could not decisively confront. For 3 standard years, a mere company of Raven Guard occupied an entire augmented chapter of Barbarus's finest until 14th year of the 31st millennium, when the Death Guard retreated in the face of approaching loyalist reinforcements from Inwit. The Marches of Madness. The World Eaters launched seemingly senseless raids on population centers across the Ultima Segmentum. Their brutal assaults aimed solely at inflicting maximum casualties among humanity while disregarding both infrastructure and military objectives. Accompanying these attacks were unseasonable violent storms and unnatural crimson cloudbursts, all signs of intensified imperial activity in the wake of the World Eaters' presence. By this stage in the Heresy, the World Eaters had become fully ensnared by Khorne, driven solely by the Blood God's insatiable thirst for bloodshed, abandoning any semblance of rational tactical or strategic goals. Second Battle of Paramar. Paramar 5 had fallen into the hands of Warmaster Horus's forces during the early stages of the Horus Heresy. In response, a mixed force of loyalists launched an assault against this strategically vital supply nexus, aiming to deny it to the traitors' war efforts. The traitor forces comprised a substantial combination of Legio Fureans, Tiger Eyes, and Legio Mortis, Death's Heads, God Engines that were in the system for rearming and resupplying after several years of intensive campaigning, alongside a significant presence of Sons of Horus and Word-bearers, Heretic Astartes. The Loyalists fielded a formidable Titan contingent drawn from Legio Atarus, Firebrands, Legio Ignatum, Firewasps, and Legio Solaria, Imperial Hunters, supported by ground assault units from the Blood Angels and White Scars legions. They executed a series of diversionary maneuvers throughout the Paramar system to draw traitor forces away from their true objective before launching a full-scale planet strike against Paramar 5's primary spaceport, capturing it intact and moving outward to begin the destruction of the sprawling provender silos on the plateau beyond. However, it soon became apparent that the traitors had seen through the Loyalist ruse and prepared a massive counterattack. Although the Loyalists inflicted considerable damage on the provender silos prior to the counter-offensive, the majority of their invasion force was ultimately encircled and mercilessly annihilated. Battle of Iceworld Trollsack. The shallow, frozen oceans of the Iceworld of Trollsack were flash-boiled to steam by the might of god engines as the Loyalist titans from Legio Atarus, firebrands, and Legio Agravides, battle scourges, clashed with the traitors from Legio Magna, flaming skulls, and Legio Victorum, foe slayers. Amidst this turmoil, the Loyalist shattered legions and the traitor world eaters Astartes fought across the disintegrating landscape of ice flows. Ultimately, outright victory eluded both factions, and each utilized the obscuring fog generated by the devastation to extract their forces and redeploy them elsewhere. Nonetheless, numerous supporting knights from both sides remained, continuing a war in which neither party could claim defeat. Terran suppression. Terran IV declared its allegiance to Horus, swayed by the persuasive words of the War Master's emissaries. In swift response, a Loyalist retribution fleet descended upon the planet, occupying Terran IV's capital city of Brandstadt and brutally extinguishing anti-imperial sentiment in a harsh mirror of the traitors' so-called dark compliance of subjugated worlds. Central to this suppression were the titans of the Legio Defensor, Nova Guard, who towered over the surface of Terran IV, their mournful war sirens demanding submission to the Emperor while making examples of defiant cities by reducing them to flaming ruins. In a twist of fate, it was an allied force from the Emperor's Children Legion, alongside the Legio Cybernetica and Legio Mortis, Death's Heads, that later executed a heavy planetary landing, liberating the world from the Loyalists during what the people of Terran IV would refer to as the Relief of Brandstadt. Battle of Zepath. Consumed by the desire to hunt down his brother, the Night Haunter, Primarch Lion L. Johnson traced a tenuous lead to the Zepath system, which had since succumbed to the forces of the Word-Bearers and World-Eaters. Farith Redloss, the lieutenant-elect of the Dark Angels Hexagrammaton Dreadwing formation, was tasked with leading the pursuit of Conrad Kurz on the world of Zepath. The Dark Angels swiftly uncovered the horrifying atrocities committed by the Word-Bearers to fuel their dark chaos rituals. This discovery led to multiple engagements against the forces of both traitor legions, culminating in the battle for the Zepathian capital city of Numentis. The traitor forces were decisively annihilated by the victorious Dark Angels, leaving the world in the care of its surviving inhabitants. Scouring of the Nostromo sector. Following the conclusion of the Horus Heresy, a retribution fleet known as Battle Fleet Vengeance, led by the Blood Angels 33rd Company, 9th Chapter, launched a campaign into the Nostromo sector to seek vengeance for their lost Primarch Sanguinius against the remaining active Night Lords combat units. Contrary to all intelligence reports, however, no organized resistance was encountered. Only scattered and isolated warbands of the 8th Legion were discovered, none larger than a reinforced company. On multiple worlds previously held by the Night Lords, they uncovered evidence that an unknown Black Shield force had ravaged the Nostromo sector in the 11th year of the 31st millennium, leaving behind only ruined fortresses and the drifting, battle-scarred wrecks of the 8th Legion. It would not be until the 17th year of the 31st millennium that this mysterious Black Shield force would be identified as the Ashen Claws, Balthor Sigma Intervention. A bloodthirsty pursuit force of traitor world eaters engaged in hunter-killer operations against defeated loyalist forces at the world of Balthor Sigma. The world eaters were supported by numerous super-heavy tanks, enabling them to hold the Legio Ossidax, Cockatrices Demi-Legio at bay. However, an unexpected intervention by a contingent of Xenos Titan analogues, later identified as Eldar, turned the tide of battle with devastating effect. It was only when traitor titans of the Legio Furians, Tiger Eyes, fought their way through to bolster the traitors' lines that total defeat was averted. As the battle concluded, the Xenos Titans withdrew into the ash-shrouded depths of Balthor Sigma's equatorial magma wastes. Birth of the Adeptus Mechanicus. A long-standing political stalemate in the Council of Terra was finally resolved, leading to the formal establishment of the Imperial Adeptus Mechanicus. This organization was recognized as distinctly separate from the corrupted Mechanicum of Mars. Fabricator General Zagreus Kane was appointed as the first High Lord of Terra to serve on the Council. Final judgment was rendered upon the captive followers of the traitor fabricator General Kelbor Hal of the Dark Mechanicum, resulting in thousands of executions. Subsequently, the Union of Loyalist Titan Orders formed under the Adeptus Titanicus or Collegia Titanica, led by the Grand Masters of several major Loyalist Titan legions. However, the fate of other loyal former Mechanicum divisions, such as the Legio Cybernetica and the regular military forces of each Forge World's Tagmata, remained uncertain. Battle of Yarant. Following a poorly advised assassination attempt on Warmaster Horus, the scattered remnants of the Space Wolves were pursued to the Yarant system, where they made a desperate last stand. The numerous enemies of Leman Russ pushed his legion to the brink of extinction, and it was only through the unexpected intervention of Corvus Corax and the Raven Guard that the Space Wolves were saved. Scouring of the Ollans cluster. As Warmaster Horus advanced on Terra, he reached the Ollans cluster, where he encountered Loyalist reinforcements bound for Beta Garmon, engaged in rearming and refueling at the Borman system. The Loyalist fleet quickly redeployed to counter the traitors' advance and protect the valuable resource worlds within the cluster. The pivotal moment of this brief but intense conflict occurred at Borman 4, when a demi-legio of Legio Astorum, warp runners, launched a bold offensive against the beleaguered capital city. In a crucial Titan battle in the volcanic Irivendi Desert north of the capital, Princeps Senioris var Harax led a surprise assault through difficult terrain at a weak point in the Legio Furians' Tiger Eyes lines, supported by Astartes' ground forces from the Iron Hands Legion. The Tiger Eyes, distracted by a bold diversionary attack, were annihilated by the Warp Runners, who succeeded in breaking through the Traitor Emperor's Children Legion's lines to reinforce the beleaguered planetary capital. In the end, Borman 4 and the entire Ollans cluster were liberated from traitor control, allowing the Loyalist forces to be redeployed to their original destination at Beta Garmon. A return to honor. Captain Praetor Archias Odenathus of the Ultramarines' 10th chapter rallied scattered survivors from his own chapter and other Loyalist factions across the Dominion of Storms in the northeastern galaxy, leading them to the world of Honorum. This unexpected Loyalist assault struck the Word-Bearers' garrison on the planet like a thunderbolt. For 3 solar weeks, desperate fighting ensued, and as the Word-Bearers' urgent requests for reinforcements went unanswered by Warmaster Horus, focused on his final push toward Terra, they resorted to the most heinous tactics for defense. Demons, warp-tainted infiltrators, and terrors from the wars of Old Night were unleashed, driving both sides to fight beyond the limits of mortal endurance, fueled by their mutual hatred. When the last traitor fell, nothing remained of the grand cities of Honorum but blasted ruins, tainted by the vile powers and devastating weapons unleashed during the conflict, leaving scars that would outlast the memory of the wars that birthed them. Serpent's Coil. Despite the apparent death of their Primarch at the Battle of Pluto, the Alpha Legion defied Horus's orders and set out to hinder the Loyalists approaching Terra, specifically targeting Ultramarines' vessels. This compelled Guilliman's fleet to intervene to prevent further losses of crucial reinforcements, critically delaying his arrival at Terra in time for the impending siege. Siege of Terra. The Siege of Terra, also known as the Battle of Terra, marked the climactic and catastrophic conclusion of the Horus Heresy. Many Loyalist Legiones Astartes had been waylaid by the forces loyal to Warmaster Horus and found themselves unable to reach Terra. The Imperial Fists, under the vigilant leadership of their Primarch Rogel Dawn, had returned to the cradle of humanity and fortified the defences of the throne world to the best of their ability. Jagatai Khan of the White Scars Legion also arrived on Terra with his legion to assist in the defence of the Imperial Palace. The Blood Angels managed to execute a warp jump to Terra just in time to meet the traitor assault. 3 entire Titan legions of the ancient Mechanicum, along with nearly 2 million mortal soldiers of the Imperialis Auxilia, stood alongside the loyalist Astartes, ready to face the forces of chaos in a battle that would determine the fate of mankind for the next 10 millennia. Yet, despite the Emperor's might and the fervent efforts of Sanguinius and the remaining loyalist Primarchs, the forces of Horus pressed onward, overwhelming all opposition. In a matter of days, the Emperor of Mankind was assailed within his great palace on Terra. The initial assault on the Imperial Palace led to a siege that lasted 55 solar days, with both sides acutely aware that the fate of the Imperium of Man hung in the balance. Inexplicably, after the traitors had breached the inner palace, the War Master lowered his void shields aboard his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, in the siege's final hours, prompting the Emperor to rise to the challenge. Accompanied by Sanguinius, Rogel Dawn, a detachment of Legiones Astartes from both legions, and the Emperor's personal guardians, the Legio Custodes, the Emperor teleported aboard the infamous traitor flagship. However, once aboard, they were separated by the War Master's malevolent warp powers, scattering them throughout the vast warship. The Emperor was the first to arrive at the bloody scene in the War Master's throne room, only to find the winged corpse of the angelic Sanguinius lying at Horus's feet. Father and son then engaged in a titanic struggle, with the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. Ultimately, the Emperor sorrowfully slew his once beloved son, and unleashed the full might of his immense psychic powers to eradicate Horus's soul from the warp, ensuring that the War Master could not be resurrected by the ruinous powers he served. However, the Emperor was gravely wounded in the fierce confrontation. With their leader fallen, the traitor legions were driven from Terra, pursued by vengeful loyalist forces into the nightmarish realm of the Eye of Terror, while Rogel Dawn ultimately rescued the Emperor and transported him back to the Imperial Palace. Following the Emperor's final instructions, Dawn placed him within the life-sustaining mechanisms of the great arcane device known as the Golden Throne, and thereafter the Emperor spoke no more. Humanity had triumphed, and the Imperium of Man would endure, but the price of victory was steep, a burden that would weigh heavily on generations to come for the next 10 millennia. The following events transpired in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, many of which were directly or indirectly influenced by the concluding campaigns of the galaxy-wide civil conflict that devastated thousands of worlds and resulted in the loss of hundreds of billions of lives. Fall of Caliban. In the wake of the Horus Heresy, the surviving loyalists rallied to support the beleaguered Imperium. The Dark Angels played a pivotal role in these battles, which would later be referred to as the Great Scouring. As they pursued the rebels, the First Legion diverted to their homeworld of Caliban, which had been enshrouded in warp storms and rendered inaccessible since Horus's betrayal. For Lionel Johnson, one final act of treachery awaited discovery. Upon the Dark Angels' arrival in orbit, their fleet came under fire from the planet's surface. Pulling back, L. Johnson sought to uncover the cause of this hostility and learned that his second-in-command, Luther, had poisoned the minds of the Dark Angels' garrison and new recruits left behind on Caliban, turning them against their Primarch out of bitterness. In the ensuing chaos, the Dark Angels unleashed a brutal orbital bombardment upon the planet, while Lion confronted Luther in personal combat. Lion was mortally wounded, and Caliban was torn apart by the unleashed Imperial forces of the ruinous powers. Only the Dark Angels' fortress monastery, the Angelicaster, survived the cataclysm. Luther was taken captive and imprisoned, while Lion's body vanished without a trace. Great Scouring. Following the end of the lamentable civil war during the Siege of Terra, the forces of the Imperium launched a monumental counteroffensive against the traitor legions of the slain War Master Horus. Before his confinement within the life support mechanisms of the Golden Throne, the Emperor pronounced judgment upon the traitors. They were declared excommunicate traitress and destined to be driven into the hellish warp rift known as the Eye of Terror, where they would remain for eternity. All records and memories of the traitor legions were to be expunged from the Imperial archives. Worlds such as Istvan V and Darwin were scoured clean of life, having been tainted by chaos. The associated forces of the traitor legions, including the Dark Mechanicum, Imperial Army regiments, and Armada Imperialis that had turned to chaos, were to be obliterated or driven into the Eye, effectively erasing their existence and the stain of their betrayal from the Imperium. This campaign would continue for decades after the Heresy's conclusion. The Loyalist Space Marine legions, devastated at the drop site massacre on Istvan V, were gradually reformed using the scant gene seed salvaged by survivors, evolving into chapters of 1,000 Astartes, rather than full legions, as mandated by Primarch Guilliman's Codex Astartes, following the second founding at the dawn of the 32nd millennium. With the Emperor's death, Guilliman was declared the Lord Commander of the Imperium and the Imperial Regent, garnering support from his remaining loyalist Primarch brother. He set about reforming the Imperium's government and military to address the aftermath of the Horus Heresy and lay a stronger foundation for the future in what became known as the Time of Rebirth. Battle of Escrador. During the Great Scouring, the Alpha Legion clashed with the Ultramarines Legion on the world of Escrador, where Guilliman confronted his bitter brother, Primarch Alpharius. Unbeknownst to him, it was actually Alpharius's twin brother, Omegon, who had assumed his identity following Alpharius's death at the hands of Rogel Dawn during the Battle of Pluto. The two Primarchs engaged in fierce, close combat, striking simultaneously with their power swords. For a fleeting moment, they stood face to face before Alpharius collapsed to the ground, dead. Bolstered by their Primarch's victory, the Ultramarines renewed their assault, decimating the remaining Alpha Legionaries. However, their triumph was short-lived. In the ensuing days, the Ultramarines were besieged on all sides by Escador's natives and remnants of Alpha Legionaries lurking in the mountains. After a week of futile skirmishes against their elusive foes, Guilliman ordered the evacuation of the planet's surface. Subsequently, he employed his legion's void ships to bombard the traitors from orbit. Despite his reluctance to engage such dishonorable adversaries, the Ultramarines found themselves consistently outmatched by the Alpha Legion, even following what was believed to be the loss of Alpharius. The Iron Cage. The Iron Cage refers to the most significant battle fought between the Imperial Fist Legion and their bitter rivals, the Chaos Space Marines of the Iron Warriors Traitor Legion, on the world of Sebastus IV. This battle occurred during the years immediately following the Horus Heresy as part of the Great Scouring campaigns. The Imperial Fists launched an assault on the planet after the Iron Warriors had fortified their defences, dubbing their network of fortifications and strongholds the Eternal Fortress. Primarch Rogel Dawn vowed to dig Perturabo out of his hole and bring him back to Terra in an iron cage. Unfortunately, the Imperial Fists fell into a trap and suffered heavy losses before the Iron Warriors were driven from the planet, a victory only achieved due to the intervention of the Ultramarines Legion. The battle favoured the traitors, yet the Imperial Fists refused to surrender. When their ammunition ran out, they resorted to brutal hand-to-hand combat, and the trenches of the Eternal Fortress ran red with blood. Had Guilliman and his Ultramarines not intervened, it is likely that the two legions would have annihilated one another. To this day, their intense animosity persists. The experience of the Iron Cage was painful for the Imperial Fists, yet it proved pivotal in shaping their character and that of their successor chapters. Following the Iron Cage, Rogel Dawn's resistance to Guilliman's proposal to divide the Space Marine legions into separate chapters evaporated, and he ultimately consented to the reformation of the 7th Legion, Eastern Fringe genocide, and the assassination of Conrad Kurz. Following Horus's death during the Siege of Terra, the traitor legions were driven into the Eye of Terror during the Great Scouring. Unlike the other traitor legions, the Night Lords, after their defeat in the Thramas Crusade, did not splinter into independent war bands and flee. Instead, they launched a campaign of genocide and terror against the Imperium across the eastern fringe of the galaxy, executing atrocities of unparalleled scale. These actions betrayed the growing sense of self-destruction that plagued their Astartes, mirroring the turmoil of their Primarch. The Night Lord's rampage ultimately came to an end with the assassination of Conrad Kurz at the hands of Kalidas assassin Mushen on the Night Lord's chosen stronghold world of Tsagwalsa. It is now believed that Kurz anticipated his imminent demise and accepted it, perhaps even welcoming it, no longer able to endure his own despair, rage, and inner darkness. Battle of Scalathrax. On the demon world of Scalathrax, deep within the Eye of Terror, the World Eaters clashed with the Emperor's children during the infamous Legion Wars shortly after the Horus Heresy. Among the World Eaters was the Khorne champion, Kharn, the former first captain of the 13th Legion. After an entire solar day of brutal fighting, the frigid night of Scalathrax descended. Terrified, both Emperor's children and World Eaters' traitor marines fled to their shelters, for the freezing night would swiftly kill even a Chaos Space Marine. Incensed at the thought of being delayed from slaughter for even a single night, Kharn raged against his fellow traitor marines and, taking up a flamer, incinerated their shelters, slaying any who attempted to intervene with his chain axe, Gorechild. The night was filled with the anguished screams of the dying and freezing as Kharn rampaged through the streets of the dead city of Black Stone, indiscriminately killing both Emperor's children and World Eaters, setting fire to any remaining shelters. By morning, most of the World Eaters lay dead, with the survivors splintered into small warbands, the shattered remnants of the once great companies of the 12th Legion. The World Eaters would never reunite and would remain fragmented into multiple Chaos Space Marine warbands for the next 10 millennia. First Battle of Garm. In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, the Thousand Sons launched an assault on the Space Wolves' shrine world of Garm, named after a legendary wolf lord from the earliest days of the Space Wolves Legion, who had given his life defending Primarch Leman Russ from an attack by Magnus the Red. Leman Russ had erected a cairn to honour Garm at the site of his death, and had placed the Spear of Russ, the mighty weapon gifted to him by the Emperor, atop Garm's tomb. The Space Wolves successfully repelled the Thousand Sons Traitor Legion and ultimately drove them from the world. Capture of the Chronicle of Ashes. A task force from the Ultramarines Legion, composed of survivors from the 19th, 48th and 207th Destroyer Cadres, encountered several renegade Word-Bearers cruisers guarding a solitary Gloriana-class battleship known as the Chronicle of Ashes in the uncharted expanses of the Dominion of Storms. Overwhelming the traitor escort vessels, the Ultramarines seized the Chronicle of Ashes in a fierce boarding action that involved nearly 300 Astartes and 2 full solar days of brutal close-quarters combat as they purged the ship's numerous decks of traitor marines. In the aftermath of their triumph, the Ultramarines discovered something unexpected in the vaulted halls of the upper decks of the Chronicle of Ashes, an account inscribed in the twisted and fey language of the now extinct Kolkis, the Word-Bearer's homeworld. This document unveiled a wealth of previously concealed information regarding events unknown to Imperial scholars, including an account detailing Primarch Lorgar's fall to chaos decades before the onset of the Heresy. The vessel was subsequently cleansed and rededicated as the Lex Talonis before being presented to the Ultramarines in the 22nd year of the 31st millennium and integrated into the newly established Nemesis chapter. Third Battle of Paramar. Following the pivotal conquest of the Forge world of Paramar for 5 during the Heresy, Warmaster Horus was compelled to redirect additional forces to secure the system, which he had originally intended to deploy elsewhere. Having gained such a critical asset, he could not afford to let his enemies reclaim it. This apprehension proved warranted when the system faced an attempted loyalist counter-invasion 2 standard years later, in the 8th year of the 31st millennium, leading to further catastrophic warfare during the tumultuous era of the Great Scouring in the 19th year of the 31st millennium, as the Loyalists endeavoured to reclaim the system once and for all. Reclamation of the Shroud of Eventide. A Blood Angels Reclamation Task Force consisting of the 9th chapter and the Angels Vermilion, ventured into the Nostromo system to salvage a space hulk designated as the Crimson Intent, formerly known as the Night Lord's vessel, the Shroud of Eventide. The Blood Angels successfully recovered the formidable vessel, cleansing and rededicating it to serve the remaining sons of Sanguinius with honor. They also extracted vital information from the hulk's damaged data cores concerning the vessel's last confrontation with the mysterious Black Shield force of Legiones Astartes. Completion of the Codex Astartes. The Primarch of the Ultramarines and Lord Commander of the Imperium, Guilliman, achieved the long-awaited completion of his magnum opus, the Codex Astartes. This tome established the new organizational and tactical doctrines for existing and future Loyalist Space Marine chapters. The Loyalist Legiones Astartes, devastated at the dropsite massacre on Istvan V, was slowly reconstituted using the scant gene seed that the survivors had managed to escape with. During this time, the legions were reformulated into chapters of 1,000 Astartes each, as mandated by Guilliman's Codex Astartes after the second founding at the dawn of the 31st millennium. This restructuring ensured that no single individual could again wield the immense power of a full Astartes legion. Second founding. The remaining Loyalist Legiones Astartes were reorganized into smaller formations known as chapters, each consisting of only 1,000 transhuman warriors. This reformation guaranteed that no one person could ever again command the full might of an entire Space Marine legion. In this manner, 23 new Space Marine chapters were created, while the 9 existing Loyalist legions were reshaped into smaller chapters, retaining the original names of their legions. Meanwhile, the Grey Knights, a special Space Marine chapter composed entirely of Psychers, was secretly founded by Malcador, the Regent of Terra, and chief aide to the Emperor before his demise. This chapter was established on the moon of Saturn, known as Titan, during the final days of the Heresy. The moon was concealed in a pocket dimension of the Immaterium to shield it from Horus and allow the new chapter to grow in strength by exploiting the peculiar flow of time within the Empyrean. Eventually, this newly formed chapter became the headquarters for the Ordo Malleus, the branch of the Inquisition tasked with safeguarding the Imperium's populace from the demonic forces and seductions of chaos. The nascent Inquisition adopted Malcador's original personal sigil as its eventual symbol, honoring his memory. Departure of the Raven Lord. In the aftermath of the Heresy, Corvus Corax personally granted the Emperor's peace to every surviving aberrant Astartes resulting from the Raven Guard's accelerated Space Marine development program. This act compelled him to seclude himself in his personal chambers at the Raven Spire on Deliverance, where he implored the recently ascended Emperor for forgiveness. Unable to absolve his guilt, the Primarch departed from the Raven Spire exactly 1 standard year after entering seclusion, boarding a transport bound for the Eye of Terror. Corax's fate remains shrouded in mystery to this day, with his last recorded words as he left Deliverance being a haunting nevermore. Scourge of Dinat Crobane. In the aftermath of the Siege of Terror, as the Great Scouring commenced, Dinat Mal of the Alpha Legion, the primary architect behind the Raven Guard's humiliating defeat at the Battle of Lix, retreated with his forces to the Dark Marches region of the Segmentum Tempestus. There he raided and obliterated a major outpost on Amara Prime, gathering a band of renegades, mutants and heretics who adopted the name Shadowed Ones. Concealing himself and his fleet amidst the debris fields and nebulae that would eventually become the Orpheus sector, Dinat Mal successfully ambushed and annihilated several Imperial punitive expeditions, establishing a reign of terror that persisted for several solar decades. Though the ultimate fate of the Shadowed Ones remains enigmatic, it is widely believed that Dinat Mal met his end at the hands of an awakened force of Necrons belonging to the Maynarch dynasty. Castigation of Colchis. Following the conclusion of the Horus Heresy, the Imperium of Man launched a retribution crusade known as the Great Scouring to purge the remaining traitor legions and those loyal to them. Amid this period of relentless vengeance and bloodshed, around 32nd year. 31st millennium, the Ultramarines finally brought the fight to Colchis exacting retribution for the word-bearers' actions against Kalth during the early years of the heresy. Upon their arrival, they discovered a ravaged world, its industries in ruins and its populace desperately clinging to civilization. In light of Lorgar's treachery and the Imperium's fear that his chaos taint had permeated the population, who had adopted the heretical faith of the word-bearers, the newly formed Inquisition mandated exterminators for the planet. The Ultramarines' battle barge, Octavius, bombarded Colchis with cyclonic torpedoes. The geological structure of Colchis was highly unstable, and the ensuing seismic activity caused by the detonations shattered the planet. Now, nothing remains of Colchis, and its location continues to be a closely guarded secret of the Inquisition. Disappearance of the Kargan. During a journey through the Maelstrom, a vast warp rift situated in the Ultima Segmentum and serving as a smaller counterpart to the Eye of Terror, the Primarch of the White Scars, Jagatai Khan, mysteriously vanished. It is believed that the Kargan was in pursuit of the Drukhari, who had ravaged Mundus Planus following the Battle of Coruscant V, accompanied by his first Brotherhood. He entered a warp gate that led into the Drukhari domain of the Webway, ultimately disappearing without a trace. The fate of the Primarch remains uncertain. Some speculate he was lost in the warp, while others believe he may have met his end or been captured by an alien warlord. The White Scars, however, hold fast to the belief that he continues to hunt throughout the galaxy and beyond in pursuit of his greatest adversaries, confident that the Kargan still resides within the Webway and will one day return to aid the chapter and its successors in a time of dire need. Battle of Thessaly. Guilliman persisted in his service with the Ultramarines, chapter after the Heresy, leading them for an additional century following the second founding. His actions during this period transformed him into the venerated figure he would ultimately become. With the traitors scattered and the Emperor effectively lost to humanity, the Imperium stood precariously at the brink of collapse. It was Guilliman's strategic genius and decisive leadership that guided the Imperium through its first full century following the Heresy, as he assumed the role of Lord Commander of the Imperium and Imperial Regent with the backing of his remaining Primarch brothers, fending off new invaders and preventing the disintegration of scattered worlds into chaos. During a void battle above Thessaly, aboard the Emperor's Children flagship, Pride of the Emperor, Guilliman fell to his once brother, the demon Primarch Fulgrim of the Traitor Legion. Struck down by his brother's chaos-tainted blade, Guilliman's nearly lifeless body was placed in a stasis field, later to be entombed in the Temple of Correction on the Ultramarines' homeworld of Macragge. There he remained until 999th year of the 41st millennium during the Ultramar campaign, when, by the grace of the Emperor, the technological prowess of Belisarius Cawl, and the intervention of the Aeldari god of the dead, Yniad, he was resurrected to once again defend the empire he had laboured so tirelessly to construct. Disappearance of the Wolf King. On the eve of the feast of the Emperor's Ascension, a holiday commemorating the day the Emperor vanquished Horus at the Siege of Terra and ascended back into the Immaterium after being entombed upon the Golden Throne, the Primarch of the Space Wolves, Leman Russ, gathered with his wolf lords for a celebratory feast. On this occasion, Leman Russ silenced the Great Hall to address his warriors, but then abruptly froze, his gaze distant as if entranced by a vision. The assembled Space Wolves looked on in trepidation as their Primarch fell to his knees, calling for his Wolf Guard and closest retainers to approach, leaving only the youngest among them, Bjorn the Fell-Handed, behind. After imparting instructions to his closest companions, Russ departed the Great Hall of the Fang, accompanied by his bodyguard, leaving Bjorn in solitude. The tale of his disappearance has been recounted every millennium by the venerable dreadnought Bjorn the Fell-Handed, the oldest Astartes dreadnought still in service across the Imperium. After 7 years of waiting, the Space Wolves chose Bjorn the Fell-Handed as their first Great Wolf, the de facto chapter master, to lead in Russ's absence until the day of his return. For 10 millennia they have awaited his return, yet still the Wolf King remains elusive. First Black Crusade. Abaddon the Despoiler, now the War Master of Chaos following Horus's demise, initiated his first offensive against the Imperium of Man after the Horus Heresy, launching the First Black Crusade and the First Battle of Cadia. This initial attempt ultimately faltered, as the forces of Chaos proved incapable of breaching the Cadian Gate, the sole navigable route from the Eye of Terror into Imperial space. For the next 10 millennia, Abaddon dedicated all his efforts to fulfilling Horus's ambitions, vowing to conquer Terra and eradicate the Corpse Emperor. These massive offensives came to be known as the Black Crusades among the Imperium's populace. Although each one appeared to fail, they succeeded in executing certain esoteric objectives aimed at gradually weakening the very fabric of reality. Abaddon termed this ongoing conflict the Long War, promising that eventually the efforts of the forces of Chaos would culminate in the dismantling of the Cadian Gate, opening a pathway to strike directly at Terra, a vast warp scar in reality that he dubbed the Crimson Path. During this epic conflict, the Imperial Fist's Primarch Rogel Dawn was said to have perished while engaging a Chaos Space Marine vessel, after spearheading an assault on a formidable Chaos war fleet that had emerged from the Eye of Terror, vastly outnumbering the Imperial defenders. Recognizing the necessity of striking the enemy fleet while it remained poised for invasion, Dawn executed hit-and-run tactics until his reinforcements could arrive. He was thought to have died aboard the Chaos Despoiler-class battleship, the Sword of Sacrilege, after leading a desperate charge against its bridge. When Dawn and his elite honor guards stormed the bridge, they were cut down to the last warrior. Later, the Imperial Fists retrieved an escape pod from one of their vessels present at the battle, which contained the weapons and power armor of their beloved Primarch. The only remnant of Dawn himself was a single skeletal fist believed by the Imperial Fists to belong to their Primarch. The ultimate fate of the Praetorian of Terra, and whether he truly perished, remains shrouded in uncertainty. Temple of the Savior Emperor becomes most influential sect of emperor worship. In the aftermath of the Siege of Terra, a highly decorated Imperial Army officer adopted the name Fatidicus, meaning prophet, and clandestinely established the Temple of the Savior Emperor on Terra, contravening the atheistic doctrines of the Imperial Truth and echoing earlier cults of emperor worship such as the Lectitio Divinitatus. Over centuries, this sect gradually permeated the newborn Imperium of Man, initially through the personnel of the Imperialis Auxilia and Armada Imperialis, and later through the Astra Militarum and the Navis Imperialis. This movement ultimately led to the formation of the Adeptus Ministorum as the state church of the Imperium in the mid-32nd millennium. The Imperial Truth soon faded into a forgotten relic of the past, as dead as the dream of a benevolent Imperium. The High Lords of Terra recognized the burgeoning faith in the Emperor as the god of mankind across the galaxy, perceiving in this new religion a potent instrument for morale building and political control.